All right, this is an interview with Walter Hooke, Cambridge Public Library, Cambridge, New York. This is the 16th of April 2004, 11 a.m. The interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russage. Could you give me your full name, your date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Yeah, Walter G. Hooke, January 12th, 1913, Bronxville, New York.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
Well, after I went to Jesuit High School in New York, and then 2 years at Fordham, and then while working in Washington in 1933 to 35, I took a lot of courses at American University in government and business.
Okay.
And then, let's see, that's prior to going in the service. So that was quite a few years later, 42. So in addition to that, I had taken courses in labor relations at the Fordham Labor School and in human resource management at the California Institute of Technology.
Okay. Do you remember where you were and your reaction when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, I was home Sunday morning, listened to the radio. I'd gone to church early. My mother was at church. I had an apartment at that time in New York City with my mother. My father had died. And I was listening to the radio when I heard it.
Do you remember your reaction to the news?
No, not exactly, other than the normal shock, I guess. You know, it's hard to believe.
Okay. Now, did you enlist or were you drafted?
No, I enlisted. As a matter of fact, I had a little trouble enlisting. I was in classified 3A because of dependency of my mother. And so with that in mind, I tried to develop some kind of a nest egg so I could enlist. And at that time I was doing labor relations for S.H. Crescent Company, which was a variety store chain like Woolworths and stuff. And so I hadn't worked for them very long, but I worked it out so that in December of 1942 rather, I enlisted as a private in the Marine Corps because I was in the retail business and in management. They were encouraging us to the Army to apply for you could become an officer and manage a PX, post exchange or something. I didn't want to do that, so I enlisted as a private in the Marine Corps, and then that caused a problem with the draft board because I guess they were upset because I enlisted when I was in 3A, and it meant they would have to take some of their people, I guess. So
Now, why did you pick the Marine Corps?
well, I just felt that be more involved.
Now, in 1942, you were, what, about 29?
Yeah, I was 29. Yeah.
29 years old,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you didn't have to.
No, I could have gone in as a PX officer or cafeteria manager or something.
Okay.
Do you think you would have been drafted at age 29?
I didn't think I would have been for a while because 3A was, I wasn't anywhere near being called.
Okay.
I didn't have that in mind.
Where did you go for your basic training?
Paris Island.
How long was your training?
I think it was 10 weeks. Then they, because I was a little older, they sent me to quartermaster school in New River, North Carolina. And so that was about another 10 weeks, and that made you a corporal, I believe. And I had said I didn't want to go into the quartermaster part, but that didn't make much difference. But then they assigned me to Quantico, Virginia, which because I was eligible for officer school, and so they sent me up there to work, and I worked in the forestry section, which was the section that ran the training for the reserve officer school. And I worked as a clerk for a very famous old-time Marine named Mickey Finn from World War One, and he was quite a character. And I worked for him as his clerk, and there was a captain in charge too. So I was there for a while, and I wrote 3 requests that I didn't want to stay in Quantico, and I did them properly. And one day Mickey Finn was out in the field, and he called in and he wanted some information. He said it was in the captain's desk in the top drawer. Would I open it and get it? Well, I opened it, and there were the 3 letters that I had requested. They'd never done anything with them. And so I wrote my own letter to the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and you know, in handwriting, put a stamp on it, didn't even put free. I mailed to the Commandant and said I didn't join the Marine Corps to stay in Quantico, and I'd like to be transferred. So very shortly I was transferred to the 4th Division, which was then forming at New River, and then I went with them to the West Coast.
Okay, and where'd you go from West Coast?
We were there quite a while, and then once again I was a little older than a lot of the people I was working with, and on the way out on the train I had met a colonel named Fondell, who was I think retired police commissioner from Washington, D.C. I'm not sure, but he was very active in the Marine Corps Reserve, and he was I don't know, the 4th Division S4, I think, or quartermaster, I don't remember which. Anyhow, I talked to him on the Pullman train because it was a 5-day trip, and he found out I'd been in business. So after I was at Camp Pendleton about 6 weeks, the phone rang where we were working, and he said, Hooke, he said, this is Fondell, which was kind of unusual for a colonel to call a corporal like that. He said, I want you to come up to division headquarters. So I thought I must have done something terrible. So I went up there, and he said, I want you to go down to San Diego and report to Quartermaster Sergeant Henderson. You'll be in charge, Henderson's in charge, and you'll be helping him organizing the working parties, loading the ships. We were on the way for the Marshall invasion. He said, we've had some young officers down there who we can't rely on. They seem to be wanting to party all the time. So I'm sending you and Henderson down to take over the working parties. So we did that for probably 4 or 5 weeks, working around the clock, loading the supplies for the 4th Division for the invasion of the Marshalls, which was, I believe, the only invasion in World War II that went directly from the mainland into operation. And we went from there to the Marshall Islands. And because we were loading all that stuff, we got on the last ship. And I guess they were spread all the way across the Pacific, I don't know. But by the time we got there, it was all over. Then we went to base, which all those Marine Corps divisions had, and they gave us, it was going to be a new base on Maui. Well, when we got there was nothing there. We had to erect tents, and it was pouring rain. It was a real mess. And we set up camp there and trained for the, turned out to be the invasion of Saipan. And when we got back there, one of the duties I had was, I guess because I was older again, was packing up all the personal supplies of the less than 200 enlisted men who'd been killed in the Marshall operation. There were very few killed, a lot less than even in Iraq now. So it was a very fast operation. And, I always remember we made little boxes, and I remember one of them was for the son of Harry Hopkins, who was Roosevelt's aide, because I had to send the box to the White House, and I always remember that. The personal belongings would be like a wallet, and dog tags, a couple of pictures or something. And then I was with them about the time they were getting ready to go to Saipan. I was sent to Camp Elliott outside of San Diego for officers training school. And
So you enlisted as a private and you ended up a second lieutenant then,
Yeah.
coming out of there?
yeah, after officers training school, that was kind of interesting too. I was with it was the last officers or reserve officer, whatever, advanced training before going to officer school. They ran 10 weeks of that, and then they sent you to officer school. Well, this was the last one they were going to have at San Diego, and after that they were going to all be in New River. So when we got done the 10 weeks, they put us on a Pullman car. Just there was that few of us, about 30, I think, and they were all real old salts from overseas. I've been overseas, but I hardly had done much. And these guys had come from Guadalcanal and all those good places. And so when we got to New River, it was obvious that they didn't realize we'd already had the training for 10 weeks. So they made a pact among themselves. Nobody would say anything. So we got 10 weeks more training in New River before we went to Quantico at officer school. So those are some of the little highlights and asides. And then after officers training school, most of my class went to as replacements for Iwo Jima or for Okinawa. But once again, because I've been overseas, most of us who've been overseas were given stateside jobs. So I was sent to Camp Pendleton as an infantry school instructor after officers training school. And I was there from January 1st about, because we got married on the 27th of January at Camp Pendleton in the chapel there.
What year was that?
That was 1945, January 1st. It would have been, we got married January 27th, and I was at duty in Pendleton with the training battalion until Easter Sunday, 8:45. And with another officer, we were given 200 enlisted men to put on a carrier, and the Bonhomme Richard, which was a brand new carrier. And it was the day the Okinawa invasion started, and these 200 troops we had, and myself and the other officer, we were supposed to be replacements that they would need in Okinawa. Well, on the trip between San Diego and Pearl Harbor, I don't know whether it was a shakedown of the trip, or, I mean, you never know those things. But we ran to a terrible storm, and they never slowed down. So it did a lot of damage to this brand new carrier. Some of the catwalks that are 60 feet above water were ripped off, and they were carrying some planes on the back, and some of them were damaged. And inside, you could sit inside and watch the steel beams being twisted. So when we got to Pearl Harbor, they put us all off because they were going to repair the ship. And we drifted around there for a few days, and they said, well, you better go down to Hilo and help the 5th Division unload their ships. They're all beat up, and you can take those 200 men and join the 5th Division, and, which we did. And we helped unload the ships. And I was assigned as to the 3rd Battalion, 28th Marines, as a 81 millimeter mortar platoon assistant leader, the replacing one who'd been killed on Iwo Jima. So I was with the 5th Division, training for the invasion of Japan from late April through Labor Day 45, when we left Hilo for Japan. It was, I think, like September 9th, 1945. And we went to Saipan, and while we were in Saipan, I got a call from the battalion commander, and he called me in, and he had a southern accent, and he said, Hooke, he said, I know you don't like that kind of work, but you my full officer anyhow. So I asked him what he meant. He'd had an argument with the S4 officer for the battalion. So in the harbor in Saipan, he made me the battalion S4 officer. And from there we went to Japan, and we landed in Sasebo on September 24th, I believe.
Now, where were you when you heard about the dropping of the atomic bombs?
We were training for the invasion of Japan in Hawaii.
What was the reaction of yourself and the men to that?
The war was over, thank God.
Okay, now when you landed in Japan, now that was a naval base, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Big Navy base.
Yeah, yeah. What was it like there? Was there a lot of destruction, or?
The town itself was leveled. As you came into the harbor, there was a huge, big church up on the hill, painted black. It turned out it was a Catholic church, and it had been painted completely black. And then part of the, as you got into town, I think it was, I forget the direction, would have been west, I guess, a little west of town. There was a lot of the Navy base still standing, and we used their buildings. It was like a naval academy. And an interesting thing happened as we went into the harbor. You know, they ran a couple of boats from the different ships into the dock to see how it would go, I suppose. I don't know how they do things. And our chaplain, Paul Bradley, who was quite a character, Father Paul Bradley, he jumped in one of them because he saw the Catholic church up there, and he went with one of the first boats in, which he wasn't supposed to do, and he got out and he walked up to the church, and there was a Japanese priest there, and later on we had a joint service with the Japanese priest and the Catholic priest, which was interesting. And we were there, and what they did was, I think, we always understood, they assigned the Marines for that part of the occupation because we had all the maps of that particular area for Operation Olympic, they were going to call it, the November invasion of Japan. And so we had all the maps of that area and knew where things were pretty much, I guess. And I remember because I was the S4, I was given a map that showed the whole town and beach and everything. So I think that's the reason the Marines were picked for that occupation duty until the Army replaced us gradually. And initially we broke our battalion, was given the job of going the whole length of Kyushu, having things surrendered to us, weapons, and checking things out, and so forth. We went all the way to Shimonoseki, which is the end of Kyushu, where you go across the water to Honshu. So we did that, and my job was to arrange the transportation of the battalion all the time, the movement, to line up trains or whatever we needed to, and then for places to sleep, like we found a ship in Shimonoseki that we used as headquarters, and we got terrific cooperation from the Japanese railroad moving the battalion when it was necessary and so forth. So I had to line up all that kind of thing, which was what my job was.
What kind of relationships did you have with the Japanese people at all? Did you
Well, when we first
have contact?
got there, it was very interesting. I guess the people had heard the military and Marines were coming. They had all the women and children in the hills that we were going to rape all the women and everything. But very quickly they started coming back, and the guys, were giving the kids candy and giving them food off the ships. And we had very good relations. We had no trouble at all. We didn't have I don't think we had one incident in our battalion of any trouble going that whole distance. They had a little trouble with the Korean prisoners that were there. That I don't know if they were prisoners, but forced labor from Korea that Japan had there, and trying to organize them to get them on ships and get them back. They gave the guys some trouble. And they set their barracks on fire and did a few things, but we didn't have any trouble with the Japanese at all. Matter of fact, they'd invite us to their houses and places for meals, which we were prohibited from doing because they were so short of food. So if we went any place, we took bread from the ship or ice cream or something, but we wouldn't take any of their food.
Now you ended up occupying Nagasaki?
That's a little different story. At a certain point, we finished our duty in Kyushu, and they started sending. They broke up the 5th Division, and they sent troops from the 2nd and 5th Division home who'd been overseas a long time, who had a lot of points. So they made the rest of us all the 2nd Division. So I was made part of the 2nd Division in Nagasaki. They have a restroom in here?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Okay.
What was it like in Nagasaki?
Yeah, before I get to Nagasaki, I should say that the amount of weapons and things they had all along the shore in Japan were very interesting. They obviously were preparing for an invasion eventually. And Nagasaki was so bad, I almost draw a blank on it, parts of it, when I first saw it. And then the people, although I didn't get there until October, about 28th, I think, the first Marines had gotten there from the 2nd Division. See, they landed in Nagasaki, and the 5th Division, Sasebo. So they landed the same day, I think, September 24th, in Nagasaki. So they'd been there a while. They helped clean up a lot by the time I got there. But there was still a lot of people running around with skin hanging off. And it was unbelievable. And
Now, were there American medical units there that helped, or?
yeah, just when they came, I don't know. When I got there, I was transferred to the 2nd Division. You know, you report in to the adjutant or something, and he was sitting outside the colonel's office, and he looked at my file, and he called to the colonel, and he says, he was from the South, and he says, Colonel, we got a motorman out here. That's the way they said mortars. He said, Colonel, got a motorman out here. Colonel says, make a motor transport officer. So I was a motor transport officer for the 2nd Division. And so I went over to the motor transport pool, and I got hold of the sergeant in charge, and I told him, I said, listen, I don't know anything about this. I said, I told him what happened. And he said, I'll make a deal with you. He said, you come here at 8 o'clock every morning, be sure we're all working. And he said, there'll be a Jeep sitting there, and he said, get it back by 4:30, and I'll run everything, and you can just check us out. And so that's pretty much what happened for a couple of months. That's about the way it worked. I wasn't particularly interested in that part of the Marine Corps anyhow, and I became friends with the Bishop of Nagasaki, Bishop Paul Yamaguchi. His cathedral had been destroyed by the bomb. It was about half a mile away. It was the largest religious building in the whole Far East at that time. It was beautiful. And most people don't realize, but there was a Christian section of Nagasaki that had been there since 1500 and something. And I believe there were Presbyterians and Catholics mostly. There might have been some other denominations. And the Catholics had this big cathedral. And because there was a couple of chaplains I knew, we were kind of interested in it, so we went over there and we met the bishop. And then he had been, what they did during the war was any young religious people, they were made like coal miners or something like that during the war. Whereas the bishop, because he had administrative responsibility and was older and stuff, he was made the administrator of an island. So he wasn't even in Nagasaki when the bomb was dropped. His mother and 2 sisters were, and they were killed. But he was not. He came back, and he hadn't been around his diocese in about 5 years, so on various days I'd drive him to different places in the Jeep where he'd want to go. And
Did he speak English?
yeah. A lot of the, I'd say, more educated did. I never remember any communications problem with anybody somehow. They had taught us a little bit of Japanese, how to say hello or something like that, but not very much. But it didn't seem to be a problem particularly.
Now, how long were you there?
I was there until the first part of February, and then was sent back to be discharged. They did it by points,
Right.
and naturally, they were running slow, so I probably should have gone back maybe a month or so earlier, but didn't. That's the way it worked. And yeah, they sent me to San Diego, and from there they gave me an airplane ticket to New York to check in at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, because that's where I had come from. And they were so, they're quite a ways behind in the paperwork. So I went back to work at my old job, I think in maybe like the 1st of April, and I never got discharged until May 3rd. I had to go back one day and get discharged. And they said I could be a first lieutenant in the reserve if I take these papers home and fill them out and mail them in. That was all it was to that. Well, I decided I didn't want to be in the reserve. I'd done my part, and I wasn't, particularly a military type, so to speak. And we had some trouble in Japan with the higher-ups, which were kind of interesting, some of the younger officers. So anyhow, I just sent the papers
The
back.
higher-ups, you mean American officers,
Yeah.
Marine Corps officers? Okay.
Yeah. So I sent the papers back blank, and that was it.
Hey, did you ever use the GI Bill at all?
No, I didn't use anything. I don't know. I had a feeling you did your duty, and that was it. I made some dumb mistakes. Like I didn't even take the insurance. I just didn't do anything, those were silly things, but that's the way I did it.
Now you started, you became active in any veterans, did you become active in any veterans groups at all, or?
Not until the 70s, when I heard about some of the people who were having trouble that had been in Nagasaki.
Now, were you having any health problems or at all, or?
Not that I really knew of, but it turned out we had some miscarriages. My wife had 3, and all our children, 4 children, were born early. But that could have been, but I don't know. I personally, like I say, I'm over 91, and other than the last couple of years, I haven't had anything.
Now, what made you become interested in helping those that were there that were having health problems?
Well, I got the 5th Division and 4th Division magazines, because I joined them. I was life members of those in the 2nd Division. And I started hearing about some of the ones that were in Nagasaki, the bulldozer operators. That's the first ones that I heard about. In the early 70s, I guess one of them came down with cancer, 72, and a guy named Quigley from Oregon. And he contacted some of his buddies, and they had all had the same thing. And it got publicized, and so I retired in 1978 from work, and sort of got involved with the new National Association of Atomic Veterans, and started helping them, and worked a great deal with them through 1990, I guess.
Now, in 1988, you received an award from the Disabled American Veterans. What was that for?
Well, starting in 1980, we worked on getting recognition from the Veterans Administration the problems of atomic veterans. And that was a long, difficult struggle. I mean, we had congressional hearings, and when the veterans first went, and the widows first went to Congress in the late 70s, asking for, this was a problem, they were all sort of considered kooks or communists or troublemakers. So it took, I'd say, 8 years of intensive lobbying to gain proper recognition. I have a excerpt here from a talk that the present Secretary of Veterans Affairs gave to the National Association of Atomic Veterans meeting last year.
Now, how many men do they feel were affected by this?
Well, over 250,000 of various branches of the military were exposed in tests in the Pacific and in Nevada. And then 100 and some thousand were exposed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So they roughly think there were about 500,000 of all members of different branches of service, doing a whole lot of different things, whether it was taking air samples in airplanes or scuba diving in tests in the Pacific. I mean, there's all kinds of ways they were exposed. But this, to give you an idea, this is what the Secretary of Veterans Affairs had to say about this. He gave a good summary of the history because he was one of the ones we worked with in the 80s when he was a Senate aide, Anthony Principi. He's now Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and a very competent man. But just, I could read this, it would probably be best. This is quoting him. On July 16, 1945, a new light burst upon the face of the earth at 5:30 a.m. Mountain wartime, not far from Alamogordo, New Mexico. At that time, President Truman called the energy of that light a new force too revolutionary to consider in the framework of old ideas, which was a way of us saying that no one really knew what we were getting into. The burden was placed on your shoulders, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines on duty from 1945 to 1963 to take on the role of living test subjects in order for scientists and researchers and government policymakers to gain answers to the questions posed by ionizing radiation. Little did you know as you patrolled the streets of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that the war had just ended for millions of U.S. servicemen was still exposing you to danger. Little did you know that the tasks of scrubbing down ships, unprotected, bare-chested, and unmasked in the Bikini Atoll after nuclear tests would come back to haunt you and your families year after those ships were nothing more than rusting hulks on the ocean floor. And little did you know that the open-air tests you witnessed in the Nevada desert would leave you vulnerable to hidden wounds, not from bullets and shrapnel, but from neutrons and gamma rays. For 18 years, you and your colleagues in uniform participated in above-ground nuclear tests without hesitation, aware of some risk, but nonetheless committed as citizen soldiers have always been to advancing freedom's cause. You were the pioneers of the atomic age, helping to lift the veil surrounding the mysteries of the atom. What you didn't know was that you were risking a dear price for every lesson that was learned. You battled an invisible enemy, ionizing radiation, and that enemy can leave physical and emotional scars just as real as the scars borne by veterans wounded during the Battle of the Bulge or hit by fire during the battle for Pork Chop Hill, or injured during the Battle of the Coral Sea, or shot down during the air battles over Vietnam. Their battles were real, and so were yours. Their wounds were real, and so was the damage inflicted by ionizing radiation. There can be no doubt that the answers revealed during those tests provided invaluable life-saving data that would have protected American military personnel should the worst war possible before mankind. What we learned from these tests also helped educate and prepare our nation's civilian population, and much of the information became valuable data for medical research and advanced many treatment technologies. But that knowledge is of little comfort to atomic veterans exposed to ionizing radiation that may have torn silently into tissue and precious organs to begin its insidious campaign to defeat your bodies. The battle was on, but you barely knew it. This morning, almost 6 decades after Trinity, and 40 years after the end of above-ground testing, atomic veterans are still looking to government for full accountability and for nothing less and nothing more than fair treatment for your illnesses. I know the road to the answers you seek has been long and frustrating one, just not for you, but to your families as well. Few of us who attended the hearings on Capitol Hill in 1980 will ever forget the heart-wrenching stories told by atomic veterans bearing terrible scars and painful disabilities. That's from Anthony Principi at a meeting last year to the National Association of Atomic Veterans. And he was, he played an interesting role in getting the legislation passed in 1988. He was counsel to the Senate minority leader of the Veterans Affairs, who was a senator from Alaska at that time. And Reagan had announced he was going to veto this legislation to provide benefits for veterans exposed to radiation. So he and Senator Murkowski had a private meeting with Reagan at the White House. I think it was May 19th, because the last day that Reagan could sign the bill was May 20th. And it was just prior to his first trip to Russia, I believe. And between Principi providing the technical information and Murkowski, who was very strong politically, they prevailed upon Reagan not to veto this legislation. So he signed it, but he said he was signing it not because that he felt, I don't know his exact words, but the gist of it was that not because he felt that there was any damage caused, but because they were members of the military and had done their duty and so on and so forth. So he really never recognized the problem. But nevertheless, the Veterans Compensation Act was amended to include payment to atomic veterans in 1988.
Okay, and that's why you received that DAV?
Yeah, I worked
award?
a lot with the, for a couple of years, at my own expense, going to Washington, and with two or three other people who worked hard, particularly two widows who lost their husbands, one from Nagasaki and one from the tests in the Pacific. And they were very smart. They had done all the legal work. And we just constantly attended hearings, and went from congressman to congressman. And after, I would say about 84, 85 maybe, the veterans organizations, the service organizations, took quite an active part. They hadn't initially, but the DAV was especially involved because I guess their legislative representative took a real interest in this, and he helped us immeasurably, telling us where to go and which congressman to talk to and all that kind of thing. And the Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars also helped lobbied for this bill in 1988.
Okay. I'm just going to have you hold this in front of you and tell when and where that was taken.
This was after I got out of officer school and was my first assignment in the training battalion at Camp Pendleton in January 1945.
Okay. And this one?
This was taken while I was assigned to the 5th Marine Division as a 81 millimeter mortar platoon officer while we were training for the invasion of Japan.
Okay, and this photograph?
This would have been taken, this would have been taken also in the 5th Marine Division camp in Hawaii, which is up in the mountains above Hilo, where we were training for Japan. And it's a picture of Father Paul Bradley, the regimental chaplain, and one of the other officers, Woods, and Lieutenant Woods and myself. And it was taken at that camp.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your interview.
Okay.